We've done this before. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to everyone. So over here to my right is Gillian Harrison. She's a carer and is part of the Alzheimer's Society Research Network. Next to her is Rob Howard, who's Professor of Psychiatry of Old Age Psychiatry in our division. And next to him is James Pickett, who is Head of Research at the Alzheimer's Society, which is the biggest voluntary, biggest dementia research dementia society in the UK. On my left is Nick Fox, who's Director of the Dementia Research Centre and Professor of Clinical Neurology. And beside him is Caitlin Aspinall, who is Deputy Editor of the Lancet Neurology. Next in blue is Naheed McAdam, who's a Research Fellow in our division in doing a PhD in dementia. And lastly is Valentina Yemi, who's a health economist from LSE. Thank you all for coming. And Gillian, I'm going to ask you to start.
Okay. Well, in that case, I better tell you why I'm here, haven't I? And why I'm on the panel. I first got involved with dementia while looking after my mother, who had it for 8 years. Well, she had it a lot longer than that, but she lived with us, with me and my husband, for 8 years at home. And suddenly, she couldn't live on her own anymore. So then, all of a sudden, my husband and I found ourselves for the first time sorting out things like daycare, respite, and all this stuff you had never thought about before, and they were our lifelines. And then after she died, I joined the Alzheimer's Society, who just set up this research network of volunteers, and it seemed to me a good thing to get involved with. Now that was 15 years ago, I think, even 16, and so I soon realised when I joined that we're all in it for the long haul. So why scientists look for causes in their endeavours to find a cure, at least ways of stopping the disease getting worse or slowing it down, all this stuff. A lot of caring continues to go on. And I've also learned that to get better care put into practice, it needs to be based on good research. I never thought that before, I never even really thought about it. But muddling along in the same way in hospitals and care homes as they've always done is just not good enough. It's not producing the best care. However, we all know that it's to get anything changed within whether it's in the NHS or in a privately run organisation, it's very difficult. And so the most reliable and best basis on which to get good practice into practice is to come up with proof that it works. So of course understanding the workings of the brain and how things are going wrong when someone gets dementia continue to be fundamental aspects of research and must be done in order to move on and find answers and treatments. I also think that improving care has to go hand in hand with this, being equally important and crucial for sufferers meanwhile, and how many years. Personally, I haven't got the time left in my life to wait around for a cure and ways of preventing disease either to arrive, because we're not there yet. Nor have the many people I know who are sufferers, early signs, or suffering from dementia already and being cared for. So I think that scientific care and research simply have to be partners. You can't do one without the other, because the best provision for those with dementia now is needed now. We have to do it now.
So I'm an old man. I've been in Alzheimer's disease research for 25 years, and one thing that's been constant through that 25 years is that we've always been told we're 5 years away from a cure for Alzheimer's. And we're told this very confidently by the cure researchers, and in many ways I think they've had it too easy. What they do is they have a cellular model, or a mouse model, or a worm model of Alzheimer's disease. They add their kind of new compound to that, and they show that the mouse's memory gets better, the worm lives longer, or finds its way through a maze more quickly. They get a fantastic publication in Nature or Science. They talk indiscreetly to journalists, and the Daily Express runs a headline, "Cure for Alzheimer's disease within the next 5 years." And in a sense, my beef with the cure researchers is that they're very good at doing the easy bit, that I've just described, and grabbing all the glory, and of course all the money. But what really matters is the longer, more difficult slog that comes after, people like myself do, the clinical trials, and seeing whether these supposed treatments actually make a difference to patients. Now, the 5 year thing is obviously rubbish, and it's obviously dangerous to make predictions, as we've all discovered in the last 24 hours about anything, but I'm going to make some. So the first prediction is that we're not going to have treatments that make a really significant difference to Alzheimer's disease. We're not going to have cures or treatments that really, really make a difference so you notice it for decades, maybe for 50 years. For sure, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have treatments that slow down the course almost imperceptibly. If you look at the solanezumab data, even if you take the most optimistic view about what those trials show, it's an advantage which is about half the size of the difference between the advantage you get with cholinesterase inhibitors, the difference between drug and placebo. Really, really tiny differences. But here's a prediction I can make with complete confidence. In the next year, 100,000 people will receive a diagnosis of dementia within the NHS. There are already nearly 1 million people with dementia that we're looking after, just in the UK, regardless of what's happening in the rest of the world. And those people, they have all kinds of horrible, distressing problems that we don't have good treatments for. So I know it's not fashionable to say dementia sufferers, but actually the people that I see with dementia and their families, they do suffer. And many of the problems that they have are problems that I'd like to have better treatments for. So when they become psychotic or agitated, or when they develop apathy, I'd like to have good treatments. We don't have those good treatments. So I'd like to see research into developing, this is called care research, isn't it? But I'd like to see better provision of money and more glamour associated with doing that kind of research. Second thing is resources are tight, as we've heard. And what that means is, if we're going to deliver healthcare and social care interventions to people with dementia, we need to know what works. We need to know what's cost effective. So we really need to do that research. So my argument and my plea is that the kind of work that people who do, in inverted commas, care research should have the same status and be as generously funded as cure research, because we can be sure that it can make a difference, it can make a difference now. And selfishly, come on, that's what we want, isn't it? For ourselves and our families, and certainly for ourselves to make it whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good evening. Well, when I announced this debate on our Twitter feed at the Alzheimer's Society, the response we got was generally one of anger. And I think the crux of it is that we're presenting you here with a choice when the people that are living with dementia are seeing local authority budgets being cut for supporting dementia care. We're seeing things that local services that were commissioned specifically for dementia now being just put into generic adult health, unsuitable. And so there's just higher and greater thresholds being put on the availability of that care. So that's really where I want to start by saying that we're here talking about how to slice a pie, and it's a very small pie, and it's a diminishingly small pie actually, and we ultimately need to, and the Alzheimer's Society is kind of the largest organisation there, is calling for a bigger pie across all the sectors. So let's just focus on that research bit a little bit, and I just want to kind of think about the treatments that have been talked about. I think we're probably more optimistic than Rob says that, you know, even before Christmas we may have news of the first drugs and their effects, the solanezumab trial that we eagerly await. I agree with Rob that these results, if it is shown to work, won't be remarkable. They won't be cures. They won't really be what people think of when they think of cures, but they will be a first step towards that. I think they will show that the disease is tractable, that actually dementia isn't too difficult, that people aren't too complicated, that we can actually do something about this brain disease. And for me, I think that's a call to action, that we should double the efforts, that it's not futile, it's not a moonshot, throw billions at it and we may get nothing, that we actually have a plan that we could follow through if we had the money. So I really think that that's a call for more money to be put into cure. But I'm going to argue the other side as well, because I want a bigger pie. And let's just take some of the economics from the Alzheimer's Society's most recent kind of spend on what dementia costs the country. And the healthcare budget is about £4.5 billion a year. The social care budget is similar, £4.5 billion a year, and up to £6 billion a year of privately funded care. And this is before we even start to price the unpaid care that carers provide to people. You're looking at a figure in excess of £25 billion here. So, I mean, let's just say that any country that really wants to use that money effectively should just put a portion of that aside to evaluate how it's doing stuff well. Let's say 1%, that's pretty mediocre. So let's call for 1% of our budget to be put aside for research, even just for care research, essentially. That's not very much in the grand scheme of £25 billion. But that would be 8 or 9 times more than we're currently going with. So we applaud kind of the efforts that we've seen and the increases in research budgets, but we've got a long way to go. And one could argue that actually the government is increasing research budgets at the same time it's decreasing social care budgets, and the increases aren't even, it's making a net saving, because it's just actually research is a distraction from the fact that it's dismantling social care at the moment. So I agree with Rob that we want to give more praise to care research. Jill did some work here, the START intervention, a coping strategy for carers. And actually 2 years later, the level of depression in those carers was, what's the number? A seventh of that weren't involved in it. That's a remarkable thing. If that was a pill, if that was an antidepressant, that would be an amazing breakthrough. That worked so much better. That wasn't, I think you got a headline somewhere on page 13 of the paper kind of thing. The language around this is not breakthrough language, but these are breakthrough effects that we can see. Again, some more work from Jill has just measured that the cost of agitation, a symptom that Rob was talking about, £2 billion a year that is spent trying to control that. And we don't know how to control it very well. And so we are kind of tipping money away and wasting it there. So I just kind of, as a sum up, and kind of reflect on things, I think there's an area that we haven't talked about today that's really important, and that's that over the last 20 years we think that there are 250,000 people in the UK that didn't develop dementia because of changes that they had made in their lifestyle. And so we haven't even mentioned the word prevention yet as such, and in fact a fraction of the UK budget, less than 5% across all healthcare, is spent on preventative approaches. But actually we think that as much of a third of dementia could have a preventive element to it, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface on how we can really optimise the prevention of dementia. So I think I will come towards the end there. My final point, just in my last second, would be that I think awareness and education are really key here as well. We still have a disease that has a lot of stigma about it, and I think if we were to scrub out the word dementia here, or put childhood cancer in, or just cancer, then it would be a different debate. And so the society really working on all those fronts, I think, to improve the lives of people affected by dementia.
Well, good evening and thank you. So, I'm a neurologist. I see patients with dementia every week. And I'm going to argue that, of course, we need both. It's in this last 24 hours, thinking about what makes a civilized society, or not, the quality of our care is core to that intrinsic value. But we've got to have ambition, and we've got to have hope. And that is at the heart of finding true disease modification, finding cures. The potential to be transformative. Of course we need more care research. Of course we need, but actually a lot of our care is lack of resource. Yes, we should spend that resource better, but at the moment we are spending a huge amount on care, and the way we will transform the disease burden will be finding really effective treatments that we can institute early enough. And I'm one of those people, Rob, who said to my patients, every 5 years that it's, or for the last 25 years, we will find a therapy in the next 5 years. I think this is better timing than ever. But why we have to do this, why we have to not retreat, because too many people have been nihilistic about the potential to transform these dreadful diseases, is because that's what our patients and our family and their families want, and because that is what can be transformative to the burden. We can improve care research, and that's important, but if we could do what's been done in HIV or in some of the cancers, that will transform burden in a way that no care research can do. And if we had retreated, when I first qualified, I worked on an AIDS ward. People came in and they died. People said it was an incurable disease and we wouldn't be able to make progress. If we are nihilistic and we give up now, and we retreat from finding therapies, we would have missed out on effective therapies for HIV and for cancer. And we are way behind in the spend. Just some figures. 13 times more money gets spent on cancer research than dementia. That large figure of billions spent, if you think about it in simplistic terms, out of the £10 that's spent on care, less than 1 pence spent on research. So what we're doing is the roof is leaking and we're moving buckets around, we're not fixing the roof. So I would say to you, we have to be ambitious. We have to provide people with hope. We can transform, and this is the right time. Okay, we have been saying it's the right time for a long time, but we have now really promising, not Daily Mail headlines, but promising immune therapies, promising beta secretase inhibitors that really look like we will transform the future, not just for mice and worms, but for people. And that is something that for future generations we've got to invest in. Of course we've got to do better with the people affected now and who will be. But if we lack ambition and we give up now, that is an abject failure and a giving up on the responsibilities we have for future generations. So we have got to not lose that focus. Actually, we've got to redouble it. We have to see the only reason we made progress in HIV and in cancer is because we invested properly and we invested for the long term and maintained the focus. So it's very clear we need both, but do not retreat from what has the potential to transform the future. Thank you.
So I'm in a bit of a funny position of being on this panel and being involved in neither care research, dementia research, or any sort of cure. But I do see a lot of research, good and bad research. And the point I'd like to make is that although we have a finite amount of resources, we can use them better, so work smarter, not harder, in both care research, care and cure research. So when you think of a lot of other complex diseases like epilepsies or cancers, you can subdivide almost infinitesimally. But we don't see that in dementia very often. You have these large, broad classifications. And so with all this work going on, we're not seeing results, or at least the public aren't seeing results. If you ask a researcher, every single day we learn more, which is fantastic. But from the public point of view, nothing has happened in the last 20, 25 years. So how do we get there? There's been this string of these big trials that haven't, well, they're called failures really, because we haven't gotten this cure. And something that I heard Eric Caron say last month at our Lancet Neurology conference was an explanation for the reason why we have all these failures, and the reason we see failure after failure is because we haven't seen success. Which sounds a bit silly, but when you think about it, if we could find some sort of cognitive improvement in some subset of Alzheimer's population, that would give us such an insight into where to direct our research. So how do we get there is the problem. And I think a lot of research is headed that way. For example, Nick Fox, just last month at MHQT published a paper with us looking at familial Alzheimer's disease and showing that things like age of onset are not only dependent on which mutation you have, but the location of that mutation in that gene. And so that becomes a way to start to stratify your population. So if a treatment doesn't work in this population, maybe it works in this one. And from those results, we can see why they work and work backwards for mechanisms and things like that. So I guess the big point I want to make is we need to work smarter. We need to stratify our patients, and we need to not just do the research, but something I don't see enough of in the papers that we get is quality of life measures. A lot of people are so focused on the cure that we are losing the care, and it's not necessarily either or. We have room to do those sort of things within the research, and I think we really need to.
If you'd asked me 3 years ago whether we should focus on cure or care for dementia, I would have answered cure without a moment's hesitation. I would have imagined a world where people with dementia are diagnosed as early as possible and then are given a tablet that reverses all disease processes and ensures perfect cognitive health from then on. But then 3 years ago, 2 things happened that made me rethink my position. The first thing was that I started my PhD, and while setting up my study, I quickly realized that research is much harder and more complex than I had thought. It always takes 10 times longer than you think it will, and given how complex dementia is, a cure is actually unlikely. The second thing that happened was that my mother was diagnosed with dementia. And after an initial phase of denial, I felt angry that there was no magic pill that would get rid of the disease and allow us all to go about our lives as before. She was assessed in a memory service and was prescribed medication to help her memory, but unfortunately developed side effects and couldn't continue taking them. She had cognitive stimulation therapy as well, but actually what seemed to make a huge difference to her cognitive state was that she had an assessment by a memory service specialist who assessed her individual needs. She was given painkillers so she could sleep better at night. She had a thorough reassessment of her diabetes care so that her blood sugars improved. And she also had psychological therapy to help manage the depressive symptoms that she had for being diagnosed with cancer 2 years previously. The memory service specialist also assessed my father and helped him manage his new role as a carer and get support for himself. And all of these interventions made a huge difference to my mother's cognition, her mental state, and her quality of life. They also made a huge difference to us as a family. But none of these interventions would have existed if research funding and healthcare professionals were only focused on curing illnesses. We generally think of cure as the action of healing a sick person or a restoration to health. But there are very few illnesses that we can actually cure. If we think about many common illnesses like diabetes, hypertension, and asthma, heart failure, patients take medication every day for the rest of their lives in order to control symptoms, but the underlying vulnerability and threat of symptom recurrence remains. So is it even possible to cure dementia? Dementia is a complex illness, not like HIV or any other microbial illness. It's a syndrome of cognitive decline causing functional impairment and is caused by a huge variety of underlying pathology. The most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's, and we know that Alzheimer's dementia is associated with amyloid protein deposition in the brain, and as mentioned, we have some very promising new treatments that look like they might be able to help remove amyloid from the damaged brain, but these treatments have not had the benefits in terms of cognition that we might expect. So what we still don't know is if amyloid is a byproduct of neuron damage or the cause. So in our search for a cure, we might be chasing correlation rather than causation. And what about the cost? According to the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry, it would cost about £1 billion to bring an amyloid-busting drug to market. And now we've got another problem, because Alzheimer's isn't the only form of dementia. What about vascular dementia? What about Lewy body dementia? So even in the best possible scenario, we've spent a huge amount of money, but it only helps a fraction of the people living with this condition. Every single patient deserves better and evidence-based care, interventions to help them and their families live better and healthier lives, and they deserve attention to be focused on this now. Recent interventions to improve cognition of people with dementia and mental health family carers, the START trial, are effective at a fraction of the cost, with the latter costing only £1.5 million. I'm not saying we don't need research into curative treatments, but focusing only on these treatments to the exclusion of other research will take a long time and a lot more money, and in the meantime there would be nothing to help people who have dementia now. So when resources are limited, surely it's irresponsible to place a £1 billion bet on a cure to the exclusion of care for people who have dementia now. But if we place our faith in care, and if we put compassion at the heart of our health service, even 0.1% of that money can make a very real difference to hundreds of thousands of people within a few years. It shouldn't really come down to care versus dreams of a cure, but if it does, care should win every time. Thank you.
Some of what I wanted to say was in the mouth of everybody. So research are scarce, and this is not new. We know that the prevalence of dementia is high, and the allocation of resources is very limited and very constrained. And if we're looking at data about resources put into research, dementia research, resources are extremely limited. If we don't have data on the global allocation of investment in dementia research, but we do have data on the UK, for example, where for £10 spent, as Nick said, for £10 spent in treatment for dementia, only 8 cents comes into research. And this is compared with cancer, where for £10 spent in treatment, £1.08, so £1 more is spent in research. But hopefully we do have some help in thinking about where to spend, to work smarter, not harder, as Kathleen said. So to think how to best allocate those resources. There are some general principles that are used in resource allocation. So at first we need to think, does it work? If we do invest in this kind of research, are we going to bring some improvement in the outcome of people with dementia in the short or in the long term? And then we do know that resources are scarce. So is it worth? Is it good value for money? Is it cost effective? Are we willing to spend some money in this piece of work? And finally, is it equitable? So are we looking into all members of the society, all different research and all different sectors? So starting from this general principle, we do have some tools that we can use in order to allocate and to understand how to best allocate the scarce resources in research. In economists have some funny tools to try to assess what are the benefits and what are the costs in putting some money in a type of research instead of putting some money in a treatment or in another project. This is called value of information. So it's very similar to other tools that economists will use in support, in treatment. And this is rarely used when allocating money into research. It's pretty much standard now for treatment, but not much for research. But saying so, even if those tools are going to be able to give us some help in a better allocation of resources, we do need 3 elements, in my opinion, in order for this to be proved further. We do need an increase in investment, and we have been seeing a commitment in increasing investment in dementia research. From the Dementia Challenge in the UK, the Global Action Against Dementia, launched by the G8. And this is the first element that is needed. We do need political commitment. Again, we have been seeing a strong sign from the G8 and ministers to make a change and to make a step forward in research in terms of making better research and in terms of increasing investment in research. And finally, we have been seeing move forward in terms of global leadership. We saw early this year, we saw the launch of the Global Strategy and Action Plan from the WHO, which is setting some term in and stressing the need for a better research in dementia, for prioritizing certain areas and to work all together. And then in the next few months, another big step will be the launch of the Global Dementia Observatory by the WHO, that we provide another knowledge hub in order to use those resources, the scarce resources, more wisely across the globe. So I think that it is clear from all the speeches that investment in research are scarce. Then we do have some tools in order to allocate better the scarce resource, but we do need increased investment, we do need political commitment, and we do need a global leadership.
Thank you very much, everyone. We're now going to throw the floor open for questions, and people are also, I think, tweeting questions at #MHQT, and Niall's going to.
So we have our first question over here.
Hi. If the best we can hope for optimistically is some sort of therapy, in 5 or 10 years that slows the progression, I'm wondering how is that a good thing? If you've got a parent with the late stage Alzheimer's, the last thing you want is that, say the average sort of the time from diagnosis to death is what, 7 years with Alzheimer's. The last thing you want is that to be delayed to 8 or 9 or 10 years and see your loved one suffer even further. How's that therapy actually a good thing?
Okay.
So I think you've made a very good argument for why we need a cure, why we need this modification. So we can keep people alive with better care for longer. We can keep bodies alive when the brain is no longer functioning at all for many years. So that's almost a danger of better care research if we don't address some major societal problems about end-of-life care. But what we have now is a window of opportunity. We now know there is a 15-year period when we can detect diseases like Alzheimer's disease before symptoms. And that may be the most promising time to intervene, maybe the only time we can effectively intervene. All we need to do, I say all, because it's a major, it's like a moonshot, is if we could delay onset by 5 years, we would halve the prevalence of dementia, because this is a late life disease. You die of something else.
So I'm not sure I really buy the idea that the drugs that have failed in Alzheimer's disease are necessarily going to work before you get Alzheimer's disease. I heard somebody say, let's not blame the drugs, let's blame the patients. And so maybe Alzheimer's disease is too late, let's go early. So actually we don't really have any evidence that giving the drugs early is going to prevent Alzheimer's disease. But I would, despite everything that I've said, which is basically nihilistic about the treatments, I would say to you, actually, to hold somebody in the mild stage of their disease for longer is a good thing. Even if you only hold them there for 6 months or a year, that's a good thing. Obviously, nobody would defend the idea of just maintaining life for the sake of it when someone had advanced dementia. But even I would acknowledge that a treatment that slows down cause so you can hold people in the early stages would be a really good thing.
I think from the point of view of the public, isn't it holding it back to a large degree? Because if someone thinks they've got dementia coming on, they're quite hesitant about getting it diagnosed because they know there's nothing can be done. So if there was this feeling, I think there is the feeling now that, better diagnosis, if something can be done, because it's not very positive to think you've got it and then think, can't anything be done about it.
There is a risk in everything we're hearing that as things get earlier and earlier, that in fact all the attention, all the resources moves earlier into the disease. And actually, in research we talk about mild cognitive impairment now, which is actually where people have kind of subtle memory changes. But that may well become a disease label kind of thing, in the way that pre-diabetes has been labelled. the more and more resources go there. And then some people will inevitably develop dementia despite best efforts there. And our attention has really gone earlier and missing the older, more frail and vulnerable population.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
We have another question over there.
Hi. I'm 63, and my doctor said I should look forward to living past 100. I have no medical conditions, and I'm fit enough that I play five-a-side football in the 20 rounds. My question, I went searching for an education that would enable me to remain fit till I die. No such education exists. And I'm thinking in terms of dementia, how many hours or weeks or days of education would I need to enable me to live that sort of lifestyle which would reduce the risk or delay the onset of Alzheimer's, dementia, and other related diseases, presumably? Because that is missing. I can't find it anywhere.
A question about prevention. That was something which has been picked up on Twitter
Yes,
as well.
James, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, James first and then, yeah, go on.
So we don't know. We know from epidemiology that we have an idea of the risk factors that are developing, but we don't know if actually intervening in those and how much benefit that will give people. I think the first bit of advice that you can take away is generally what's good for your heart is good for your head. So things that you're doing for to avoid your risk of heart attacks and stroke are helping your dementia risk. But there's so much more that we don't actually understand here. There are things like the role of sleep in the development of dementia, the role of other mental illness isn't really there. And I think we're really behind on this in terms of we understand physical health really well and what you do to improve your physical health. But we can develop a whole separate paradigm about cognitive health and really be as prescriptive as we are about physical health, although that's research that we really need to invest in.
Yeah, you mentioned education. I assume you were talking about things that you can do to keep your brain active, but in a way the most important...
Education in a proper sense. I counted the minutes of advice I can read on dementia. I read it in 25 minutes. I don't want information, I want an education.
Okay, so I've sort of taken your question to mean about sort of prevention of developing dementia, and actually getting an early education is one of the protective factors, as well as not having any cardiovascular risk factors. So we're already ahead of the game in that sense. And as James was saying, keeping mentally and physically active, we know is protective. But yes, we certainly need better quality studies to find out exactly when these risk factors are important, when we should be targeting them, and to what extent we should be trying to control them.
Okay, so yes, we have a question over here. There you go.
Hi, I just wanted to disentangle the investment in terms of private sector and public sector. And you mentioned, say, 4.5 billion budget for social care and healthcare, and that sounded like a sort of NHS public figure. And I imagine aspects of research are kind of considered sexier by private companies like Cure, maybe. And what's going on at the moment in terms of private sector investment in Cure versus care, and what are the prospects for the future with the split?
So we've been very worried about our investment in Cure in the big pharma industry here in the UK. Pharma being things like Pfizer that had a large part of the big office down in Kent have now disappeared, and that's been a concern. I think there's an optimism at the moment that, as we've heard, there is an optimism that they do have things that are, if they invest in long term, that could be profitable. It's very hard to put a number on how much is being spent. If any of my colleagues have any, then that would be great to hear. Yeah. In terms of, some of the social care investment, we've seen that reports in the last kind of couple of weeks that nearly half of all local authorities are paying below what we regard to be the minimum threshold for an hour of decent care at the moment. So the margins are extremely tight in that, and I'm sure others will speak, but the number of care businesses that are saying we can't operate a profitable one in this time. Restrained budget is growing.
Yes, I think I would just like to add something about the fact that we don't have any data on what is the amount of research funding that is allocated by private companies. But we do have global data on biomedical research that suggests that 60% of the funding in research comes from private companies. So only the rest, the 30%, is given by government, which is a very low rate.
Okay, so we've got another question right at the back here. It's a bit of a way for me to walk back to the front, so after this one, something from Twitter, I think. So you go ahead.
I've heard talk about the kind of global and the World Health Organization and also the government. And I wondered if you could say a bit your opinion about whether it's more useful for us in regards of dealing with the dementia to look more to global kind of strategies or to look more to local strategies and local research, meaning national as opposed to international.
You talked about it locally.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I think that the message was already, it was quite clear and quite nicely given by the G8 in setting up the global action against dementia and stressing the need for a coordinated action across the different government. This said, and the WHO meeting on dementia follow up the same message. So, this coordinated action doesn't mean the same action for every country. There is something that can be done all together, either in terms of investment and cross-subsidizing investment, but there is something that needs to be done locally and needs to be done and to be adapted locally. But also there is an important element of knowledge exchange and learning from each other that needs to be done in order to make all the efforts that we are making in research more effective at the end. And we have intervention and we have data that are sounding for both low and middle income countries and high income countries. So up to now and up to the setting up of this global strategy and action plan from the WHO, we didn't think about a joint action. And we're now thinking about it. And I think this is a very, very nice step forward.
Okay. I think Tim Shakespeare over there, he sent a question in Twitter, and I wondered if you wanted to say it yourself.
Oh, this was a few days ago. I just remember what it was.
Do you want to? Sorry. All right, I'm going to hear.
There we go, we've identified you. Could you pass that on, please?
Okay, so I think it's kind of clear there's got to be a balance, but like the question is, how do we decide that balance? I guess pragmatically, how is the balance made? And maybe yes, practically, like in theory, who should be deciding? So should it be the public that gets to decide? Should it be politicians? Should it be scientists? Who makes that decision?
Okay, so who should decide? Gillian, as a carer, what do you think? Who should decide?
Well, I think there's two things here. If you think of product research, therefore you're dependent on the big pharma to actually get into it when they think they can make a profit, which is quite understandable because this is a very expensive area, we can tell. So they're there when there's a profit going, you know. making or potential. So that side of it is more clear-cut than the care side of it, which we're seeing is just as important. But you can't expect, who can you expect to get involved with that if it isn't just if there's no money, coming back for it? I mean, I think that some of the care research on social services, if social services can see there might be benefit for doing something and cutting down on the costs, they might be interested in looking at, for instance, equipment stuff. If they're going to save money by putting in, all sorts of things to help people care for themselves, and that's going to save costs, and that can be shown to save costs, they're going to be more interested in introducing it or using it than if it's just better for, you've got to see whether it's better for the people as well. But, in a way, it's a financial decision because everybody's short of money.
So I'd like to see a level playing field with scientific quality being decided.
So, I think we have, funding bodies that decide these ideas about funding, but I think what we need to sort of even be starting earlier than that. I think that there needs to be a massive change in our attitude towards dementia, because I think, at the moment there is this idea that looking at molecules and cells is somehow more exciting and more breakthrough and more, that's real research, whereas, we're sort of a bit apologetic about caring research, and more looking at more the social aspects of dementia. So I think there needs to be a shift in that, so that funding bodies see that actually this is worthwhile, this is real, this is making a real difference to families and people with dementia.
So, of course, the answer is both public and private, but the big problem with getting public input, as we've all seen today, voting with the general public doesn't work all the time. So, to go off on a tiny tangent, what we really need is better education, so that when we get public input to deciding how research is funded, it's a well-educated opinion and not just a reactionary one to a personal experience.
Yeah, and that might also stop some people getting dementia as well, but we're educated.
I think another question over this side of the room.
Thanks very much. This is one on Twitter from Hannah Goodison. What do you think about drug repurposing as an avenue for treatment research?
I think it's
Can you explain what drug repurposing is?
Oh, sorry. Drug repurposing is taking a drug that already has gone through all its safety, it's had a license, so all that work and investment to create a therapy that's used for one condition. Viagra is the classic example, which was not designed for impotence, but it then found use in that area. But there are other examples across medicine where, so is drug repurposing a good idea? Absolutely, but it has to have a really solid foundation. I think too often it's thought of as just an easy way. I actually believe that our understanding is so much better than it's been 5 or 10 years ago. There's been an explosion of basic understanding, and I think we have not just one potential avenue, but multiple leads, and actually building it up from the basic science with a clear direction rather than just using it because it's already been licensed is more effective.
So I'd like to say that repurposing is probably the way. If you look at history, almost all the drugs that we have in psychiatry were repurposed agents. They were discovered by accident. They were drugs that were used for other things that also appeared to have an effect on mental health illness symptoms. So I think repurposing is a great way to go. It's very, very cheap. Some of us are involved in trying to set up a large platform that could very efficiently process repurposed agents and evaluate to see what they're working on. So send all your money to James or myself so that we can do that.
I would like to advocate repurposing as a really valuable approach. I mean, over the last 5 years, we've seen things like inflammation from the basic science really come to the forefront. And we have a lot of drugs that are currently used in things like rheumatoid arthritis, and they do offer real potential. And we we are running those trials at the moment, and we're running them on budgets of less than £1 million. And that's comparative to some of the pharma ones that are 300 times that, 500 times that. So it can add to the armoury. It adds also to our basic understanding, even if these things eventually don't work. So I would really thank the person on Twitter for the question, and really say I do think it has a place to play in both potentially open treatments, but also a way to do in-human basic science that helps us understand mechanisms.
Okay, we're coming near the end of our time, so have you got another question?
I think we probably have time for another question.
One more question before the panel question.
Do you have a question down at the back? Thank you. I'd like to go off at a tangent here. I'm a member of Health Watch Barnet, and a volunteer member. I was responsible for a recent report on dementia in Barnet. And why I say I'm going off at a tangent, because we find there we had over 3,000 cases of dementia amongst the 68 practices of GPs. But it's anticipated there's another 4,000 patients or potential patients, residents in Barnet, who have not been recognised and diagnosed. Barnet has a population now being the largest council in London, I should say, of about 350,000. And this relates to care. You've got to find them before you can care for them. So there's 4,000 running around in Barnet alone anticipated, and then that reflects again on BAMI, the Black Asian minority ethnic groups within the country, where you get this layback. They won't come forward, you can't find them. And a few years ago, last published statistics, there were only about 25,000 in the whole of the UK who have been diagnosed in that group. This reflects badly, I'm afraid, on the GPs and the CCGs. The GPs have insufficient time to diagnose, and the CCGs were backward in informing the GPs in which directions to look. I won't go on any further, of course no time is short, but as I say, you have to find them before you can care for them. Thank you. Oh, one final point, sorry. I followed you on the internet on many faces of dementia, and I'd like to congratulate you and your colleagues on the most fascinating series of items there. Thank you.
Naheed, would you like to, since it's the subject of your PhD, to talk about minority ethnic groups and dementia? Just a minute talk, I don't
So yeah, it's absolutely a valid point that you can't treat someone or care for them until you find them, and there is, you know, even amongst the majority ethnic population, hesitation in coming forward. That, you know, that's changed. But minority ethnic people, there's a huge stigma attached to it. This sense that you have to look after your family member until you can't cope anymore. And you know, both Jill and I have been working on interventions to try and change that. And we're waiting for the results to see whether what we've done works, because we know just telling people get help, you know, giving them the information doesn't work. So it's about trying to find out what's going to motivate people to come forward, and we're working on that.
If I could add to that, one of the reasons people have 2-week targets for cancer, and the population feels you must get that lump checked out, is they believe you can do something about it. That's where giving people hope of a true disease-modifying therapy would mean people, GPs, families would be coming forward more quickly.
Okay, but we know they already are, so I mean, I've not been giving opinions because I believe that David only does it about 50% of the time. So we know they're coming. There's been a vast increase in the numbers already coming forward, and that's because there are things that we can do, and we can really make a difference to people's lives, people's quality of life, and people's future. But we certainly can't cure them now. Anyway, so 2 questions, first to the audience and then one to the panel. So the first question, What do you think? The debate is resources are limited and dementia research should therefore focus on curing, not caring. Put your hand up if you agree. How many?
What's the reasonable number?
I put your hand up if you disagree.
It's a caring. So it looks as if, yeah.
I think the disagreements have it. And lastly, a question for all the panel. So the Dementia Research Institute is about to be awarded, it's £250 million. If you had £250 million on dementia research, what would you do with it? And should we, Julie looks like you have no idea. Valentina, what would you do with it?
Right, so, all right. So I would like to invest possibly in 3 different elements. One is quite straightforward, would be treatment, so the cure or the care. And second, I would like to allocate some part of this funding, this 250 million, in coordination of data and research and data sharing in order for people to be able to see, to be aware of what other people are doing and not to duplicate. And third, another part would be allocated to training for both high quality research, but also for learning how to co-produce research. So to produce it with user, to produce it with government, to produce it with pharmaceutical companies, in order for the evidence to be used. Otherwise, it's going to be staying in a paper, and it's very difficult to transfer the knowledge into action.
I think we need a paradigm shift actually towards thinking about dementia more as a chronic illness like heart failure, so that we can focus more on multiple treatments to manage symptoms rather than continuing to chase this idea that there is a single cure out there.
Okay. I'll pick from what Valentina said a bit, data sharing and management, but also access. So as an editor of the journal, I know that open access is a hotly contested issue. A lot of research is not available to people who don't have an institution with a lot of money to pay for it. So on the one hand, researchers need access to every other researcher's data, but the public also needs access, and clinicians need access to the results of that, so we can get that information out there more. So a lot of my money would go towards access.
So I would create a critical mass, create a dementia research institute that would do the basic science that has not been done before, pulling together the best people in the world to work on the project, just like the moonshot did. And I would almost ask that question back to the audience. So we've talked about it in the abstract of what we want to spend money on, cure research or care research. What would you want now for you or your loved one? I'd like something that was an effective therapy.
Okay, Jim?
Well, as an organisation investing £50 million into this Dementia Research Institute, I do think it's a very good idea. And, you know, it's going to focus on understanding the mechanism of the disease, but also bridge into better ways of caring and prevention. And I really hope that there's also an agenda in the middle that I really think we can exploit. We've heard about these interventions, the care interventions. We don't massively know why they work. So I think there's a whole area of kind of the biology of psychosocial interventions, the biology of caring, that I'd really like to explore more further, because I think that could be quite fruitful.
So Nick asked you to think about what you'd like. Well, 250 million would buy you a yacht like Philip Green. So that's clearly what you'd like. But I tell you what I'd like. What I'd like is a dementia institute, but not one that was obsessed with cure. One that saw its responsibility as finding cures, but also developing care research as well, and seeing it as equally important.
Well, yes, I mean, that's how I started, saying that both need to be done. And it's very difficult to prioritise one over the other, and they should go hand in hand because they are very linked in lots of ways.
So I suppose one last question for the panel. Does anyone truly believe that dementia will be cured, that every person who presents with dementia will be able to revert to normal cognition and not get worse? Does anyone believe that here? Nobody?
Well, eventually.
Yeah, I asked Rob to be controversial, but he can't help
Honestly, I mean, if we were sitting in this lecture theatre 100 years ago, we'd be absolutely amazed at what medicine can do now.
That's true.
I mean, the thing is, it's not 5 years away, and it's not 10 years away. It might be 100 years away. Of course, eventually, we're going to get that.
But I do feel we will be like the first antibiotics or the first treatments for the first cancers, the first treatments for HIV. The first things won't be great. They maybe have lots of side effects. And once we have that thin edge of the wedge in, then we will absolutely break this problem open. And it will be picking off a disease at a time. And it may be that we have a narrow segment. If you look at cancer, it was a very narrow segments, a subsection of one small cancer. That's how things break open. And that's what we have to do. We'll pick off, maybe it's early onset Alzheimer's disease, maybe it's programming associated FTD, maybe it's prion disease. I don't know. But once we crack one, we'll start working out how we can do it. And the treatments will go from there.
We're benefiting from the political limelight at the moment, and that could disappear at any moment. And it's key that we use this momentum now to make sure that if it does disappear and focus moves elsewhere, and there are many other important causes that it could move to, but we actually have something at this moment that allows us to continue without the prime ministers of the G7 nations getting together every 6 months to ask what are you doing about dementia to each other, but we are able to self-sustain that.
Dementia is the most important economic problem we have currently, and the only way the limelight will disappear is if we cure it. So,
I disagree. I think people have given up on other diseases at times. And I think, there was a huge amount of therapeutic research into stroke, and that all went away. So it's not inevitable.
They haven't given it up on it, and there's lots less people having stroke. But yes, whatever, I'm sure we'll keep advancing and making lots of people a lot better. So now it's time to have a drink. I think we've got tequila to support Mexico, and we'll